Good morning and welcome to the Lowitja Institute Major Research Grant Q&A webinar. We're so excited to have you all with us this morning. I would like to begin by acknowledging country and pay respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. We are connecting with you from the lands of the Worimi and Awabakal people, who are the caretakers of these lands, skies, seas and waterways since time immemorial. I extend that acknowledgement and respect to the lands on which you are all connecting from today. This always was and always will be Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander land. Thank you for joining us this morning. I'm Felicity Collis and I'm a proud Gomeroi woman from Northwest New South Wales, and I'm a Senior Project Officer here at the Lowitja Institute in the Research and Knowledge Translation team, and it's my absolute honour and privilege to be joining you all today. In this webinar, you will meet some of the Research and Knowledge Translation team who will provide you with an overview of the Major Grants Research Scheme and details on how to apply and answer any questions that you might have. For today's session, audience members are muted and the chat is disabled. So if I can direct your attention to the bottom of your screen, you're encouraged to use the Q&A function for questions. Just click on the Q&A icon and type your questions in there. We'll be able to see them pop up throughout the webinar, and we'll have some time for questions and answers at the end. But please don't be shy, drop your questions in. We do love to have a yarn and we can't wait to hear the questions that you have. I'll return to support the Q&A portion of this event, but for now, I'll hand you over to the team who will introduce and position themselves.
Thanks, Flick. I can see lots of familiar names in the participant box, but for those who don't know me, I am Michelle Kennedy. I'm a Wiradjuri woman. I have family connections along the Cudgegong River and to Gundagai. I'm a descendant of station workers and sheep shearers who lived and worked all across Wiradjuri lands, but I've grown up off my country. I've grown up here on Worimi Country. So I'm a mother, a stepmother, a sister and an auntie, an artist, a social worker, and now an Aboriginal health researcher. And it is my privilege to be able to work with MOB every single day, drawing on our expert knowledges as blackfellas to change the way health and wellbeing research is being done. Everything we do in our research is informed by who we are, our social and cultural positioning. Who we are, but probably more importantly, who claims us, informs the way that we do research. I'm the research advisor at Lowitja Institute, and I'm the previous executive manager of research and knowledge translation, where I've been able to redesign our grants program, build our application forms and our processes. So I'm pretty confident that I can answer pretty much any question that you throw at me today. And when I'm not at Lowitja Institute, I run a research program here at the University of Newcastle, where I'm able to share an office with the deadly Shayley famine.
Hey Mob, my name is Shay. I'm a proud Wiradjuri woman, granddaughter, auntie and sister. I was raised on Ngunnawal and Ngambri country, while my family is from Griffith, Wagga and the broader New South Wales Riverina. I've worked at the Lowitja Institute since early 2022 as part of the Research and Knowledge Translation team, delivering a wide range of community and early career researcher grants. Additionally, I'm in my first year of my undergraduate studies in social science and criminology at the University of Newcastle. My learnings on how to work with MOB have been taught to me by my elders, but most specifically my grandmother, Isabel Collins, who taught me it was our job to look after our MOB proper ways, hence why I am here today. These last 2 years have led me to meeting some amazing people and some amazing opportunities, including meeting with communities and working with them to transform their ideas into deadly research projects. Thank you.
Thanks, Shay. So Shay will come back and join us a bit later in our agenda. But look, we've got a pretty structured and unstructured agenda. So as Flick said previously, Don't wait till the end to drop questions in the Q&A box. I've got it up. I'm looking as I'm speaking to you because I am happy to pivot and to answer questions while I'm explaining any of the content for our major grant scheme. We want to give you a bit of an overview of our major grant round. Some people might not be aware of how our grants run. I want to introduce our new research agenda themes, give some discussion around the eligibility and selection criteria. We've done a lot of work to really refine these because as someone who writes grants for my own research, I know how much time and energy goes into developing a grant. So we don't want anyone doing all of that work if they're not going to be eligible for these grant schemes. I'll probably give you a bit of an insight to how we run our assessment panel process as well, because that's always really important to know when you're developing up a new project. Shay will walk you through the Smarty Grants portal, which is our portal for the submission of the grants, but it's also where we do all of our grant management for all of our funded work. We'll go over the key dates because these are locked and solid. We'll go through some frequently asked questions if people are too ashamed to be putting in the Q&A box. And then we're going to have time where Shay and I sit together in the room and answer any of the questions that you have. But as I said, please don't wait till the end because I can pivot and tell you more as we go. So the Lowitja Institute Major Grants has a pretty long history. We've been known to support incredible research led by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander researchers like Ray Lovett, feeding into his My Kauai study and the early development of that, Professor Kath Chamberlain and her work on trauma-informed care. And since the last few years, we've focused our major grants as being only available to Aboriginal community-controlled organisations. So our grants are up to $200,000 and the projects run for 2 years. They can run shorter than that and you can ask for less money than that, but that is our absolute maximum for our grant round. And the idea of Lowitja Institute grants is to fill a gap that we can see in health and medical research that isn't being achieved through other major grant funding. So our grants are very different to an NHMRC or an MRFF grant. And so these are only given to community controlled orgs and they are only given to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander researchers to lead research. We want to be feeding into community-led research priorities to change policy and practice for our people because we know that our communities have the solutions. We know what's best. And we are also, whether we have a PhD or not, we are also inherently researchers. We come from the oldest researchers in the world. And Lowitja Institute recognises that in our major grant scheme. We want to support the capability and capacity building for our communities to be able to drive their own research and do it their way. So while a grant in, say, an MRFF grant round would fund an individual researcher to conduct a project, we fund an organisation. We recognise that sometimes people move around an organisation, they might leave. The grants don't go with them like they would an MRFF grant. The grants sit within our community controlled, and that gives our community controlled orgs all of the power and decision-making about how the research is conducted. In saying that, well, I'll go through it in the eligibility criteria. Our grants are funded to community controlled orgs, but you can partner with whoever you want. Your whole research team doesn't have to be in your organisation. We encourage people to have really strong relationships, not just with universities, but with community partners, with other organisations to help you deliver the research that you want to do. Now, at Lowitja Institute, knowledge translation is identified as critical to research. It's essentially what makes research matter. And to support knowledge translation of our major research projects, we have additional funding of $20,000, which is available for anyone who receives a major grant round, and it's a separate application process after the 12-month period. And I tell you this in the early stages of applying for your grant because you can almost know that that extra money will be available. But in the application forms, we do ask you some key questions about knowledge translation to see that you've started to think about how you would embed KT, how you would bring together the key stakeholders and develop a range of knowledge translation activities that are going to be meaningful to the research in which you're conducting. Now, to give you some idea of the key dates, because these are essential for any planning of an application. For anyone new to applying for grants, it might seem like this is a long period of time, but it's not. It takes a long time to write a grant, I assure you. Our applications opened on the 20th of May, and we're going to leave them open until the 2nd of August. Last time we ran our major grant round, we had a flurry of emails asking us if there was going to be an extension to the closing date, and we absolutely cannot do that. As a community-controlled organisation, the awarding of these grants doesn't just go to an assessment panel, but it's also endorsed by our board. And so we've really carefully outlined these dates to align with our assessment panel scheduled dates, giving people time to assess, but also our board, so that there is a lot of eyes on this to ensure that the right people are being awarded this funding. But also there's a really strong line of transparency and accountability in the ways in which we do business here at Lowitja Institute. So we anticipate telling people around November whether they were successful, and work with them over November and December to do our contracting period, and acknowledge that some of our orgs almost near shut down over the Christmas break. Lots of people take leave and have family time. So we anticipated people starting their projects by about the end of January. So our research agenda was, for those new to the way Lowitja Institute does commissioning, all of the commissioning that we do aligns with the set research agenda, and establishing a research agenda aligns with our international conference. And for anyone who joined our party last year when we had our Lowitja Institute conference, you will have been involved in the process to establish our new research agenda. We had a really large process of yarning with communities. All the attendees at the conference were able to send us their priorities. And then we worked collectively, Flick and I worked collectively with our research committee to set our new agenda. When you're applying for a grant, you're asked to select which of our research agenda themes your project most aligns to. So our new themes are self-determination, sovereignty, cultural determinants, and racism. And on the application guideline, you'll see definitions aligned with those research agenda themes, and you're able to speak to that within your application. Previously, people would select multiple research agenda themes for their work, but moving forward, when we're looking to measure our impact, we really want people to identify just one key theme that aligns most with their work. So as I mentioned before, we fund only Aboriginal community-controlled organisations and research that is led by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And when we say that, we acknowledge that PhDs do not make people the appropriate researchers for this project. And we acknowledge that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have inherent knowledge around best practice research. So you don't have to have a track record and previous research experience to be able to be a CI or a project lead on a research that's funded by Lowitja Institute. We will ask you in your application who is on the research team, but also how you will work together to implement the research. So we do want to know a bit about the doing of the research, but we are not worried as much about Euro-Western metrics of who is and who is not deemed a researcher. As I said, we want your applications to align with one of our research themes, and we really do look for the quality of the research design. We still want to see that you have a research question and that you have aims and objectives, and that the methodology of the work that you're going to undertake does align with those aims. We prioritise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community leadership at all levels. So while it is wonderful we're funding Aboriginal community-controlled orgs and projects led by Aboriginal people, but we really prioritise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people at every level of their research process. We want to look for research that's going to build our capacity and capability for community-led research. And we also want to look at the significance and the impact. So we're going to look at all of those criteria as we're marking and assessing, And in the guideline, which we will give you some QR codes for soon, we tried to carefully articulate what we mean by that and what we want to see in the application, and then how you would be scored based on those eligibility and selection criteria. And just for some context, every application is double blind assessed, blind as much as we can. So in saying that, we have a pool of assessors for our Lowitja Institute grants. Those assessors are academics in institutes, only Aboriginal and Torres Strait academics in institutes. They are also policy people working in government and policy makers, and it's also a couple of our board members on our committee. So each application has at least 2 assessors which will score your application, and then it is presented at a full assessment panel meeting where we speak in depth about the study and the strengths and the weaknesses of the study, and also the scores. And that's what we will proceed with the ranking. The amount of applications we will fund depends on the number of applications we receive, but also how much money we have. So if we have people not asking for the full 200,000, we might be able to fund more. So we don't want to say how many applications we will fund, but I will say that based on the last grant round, we won't be funding as many as we did in previous year because of the limited funding that we do have. So it is a competitive grant round. Last time, all of the applications that we received, because we had a really clear guideline and eligibility, all the applications that we received were eligible, which was excellent. No one had wasted their time applying and then not been able to be assessed. And then we funded just under half of the applications that we received. So we do anticipate funding less this time. So the success rate won't be as high, but given any grant round that we apply for, it's all about who else is applying and what types of research you're competing against. I do want to just jump into answering one question because it comes up and it's relevant to this. We've been asked if you can apply for 2 themes in 2 separate applications. And in short, you are able to apply, you can produce as many research applications as you like. However, we are only able to fund 1 application per organisation. So we did experience that last grant round where people did put forward a couple applications, but you would only be able to have 1 funded. So all would be scored and all will be assessed independent of each other. But when we look at ranking, there will only be 1 that can be funded. But I'll hand over now before we do go into the Q&A section. But please continue to write questions. It really does help us create more flow for this portion of the webinar because we can't see anyone's faces. So please give us your words in lieu of your faces. I will hand over now to our expert, Shaylee, who built our online portal that the applications are submitted through, and she'll be able to talk through some of the key things that you might need to know.
Hello again, new mob. As mentioned, the 2024 major grant round will be delivered via Smarter Grants and will close Friday, the 2nd of August. We invite you to scan the QR code on the screen so you can access, preview and download the grant application. We encourage you to familiarise yourself with the application to ensure you are comfortable and at ease with the portal system, as we all know how tricky it can be sometimes using a whole new system. In addition to familiarising yourself with the Smarty Grant system, our Deadly Research and Knowledge Translation team have collated a bunch of guides to support you on your application journey to hopefully help you throughout. You can also access the grant guidelines, terms and conditions, examples and templates, which can be easily downloaded off Smarty Grants. By scanning the QR code again on the screen and scrolling down, you will find several links which you can click and download for easy accessibility. These PDFs will assist you throughout the application process, and we encourage you to utilise them as much as possible. Utilising the documents such as the budget examples and project proposal template will assist you to plan your grant application, and more importantly, provide a guide on how to articulate your community's priorities into a meaningful research project. Next, we thought it would be handy to cover some key tips on the next slide. Now, these are just some real and simple, easy tips we encourage you to consider when completing a major grant application. These range from using a generic organisation email for the Smarty Grants account, like your reception or admin details, so later down the track when submitting another application for other Lowitja grant schemes, your organisation has all the details and information linked to one account. Additionally, always save the progress of your application, as Smarty Grants does not save automatically, and we have seen before that some people do lose their work, and unfortunately neither the Lowitja Institute or Smarty Grants can rectify any unsafe progress. Finally, just re-echoing, please utilise all the documents and guides. These guides have been curated by our amazing research assistant, Associate Professor Michelle Kennedy, and 2 of her deadly PhD students to ensure we got proper support for our mob, which we know is so important. Now, this is a lot of information for you, mob. We want to support you all throughout the process. So we've included the 2 best support contact details for the major grant process. In the first instance, please reach out. Yep, here we go. Sorry, guys, difficulties. In the first instance, please reach out via research@lowitja.org.au for any questions regarding the major grant round, grant guidelines, as well as the grant terms and conditions. Overall, any questions regarding the content and questions, including the major grant application. Additionally, I made the Smarty Grants How to Apply guide, which we encourage you to access and download via the first QR code on the screen there. However, if you have any questions regarding the Smarty Grants portal, including how to submit an application, navigating the portal, or changing owner of the submission, we encourage you to contact Smarty Grants using the contact details provided. We've just put their phone and email on there, as we know some people prefer email and phone. This support is free and is run by Smarty Grants experts and is accessible during business hours, Monday to Friday. Furthermore, Smarty Grants experts created a how to apply support guide for applicants, which we encourage you to access the PDF via the QR code on the screen. Thank you, guys. I'll hand over to Michelle now.
Thank you so much, Shay. Okay, so this is open to you guys now. The period from now till the end of our webinar is all you and all the questions. And I can see we have lots of people here, so I'm sure there are a lot more questions that are coming into the Q&A box. Flick and Shay will join me in the room so that this can feel a bit more like a conversation rather than answering back and forth like that. So a few things that have come up before we thought we could run through quickly. So an organisation, if you can submit more than 1 application, which I explained before, you can only have 1 grant. It is really important to know that if you are an organisation that currently holds a Lowitja Institute seeding grant or major grant, they need to be completed before you're able to hold another grant of ours. So you wouldn't be excluded per se, but we do not want to be seen to be giving the same organisations this limited pool of money. We do want to be able to spread this around. In the application process, we ask you a few questions, and it's probably good for you to realise maybe why we ask those questions. So we ask you if you've ever received a Lowitja Institute grant before and what type of grant that might be. And we also ask you if you've ever led research before. And so for clarity, we don't ask those questions to exclude people or to score people differently. Those questions are about us being able to measure our impact. And so we were really excited last grant round because we funded 50% of the orgs that we funded had never led their own research before. We know that a lot of our communities are being asked to partner in research all the time, but less likely are we able to do research our way. And these grants are really focused on our communities being able to do it our way. So when you have questions like that, please don't think that they're part of us and our scoring and our ranking to be just like other Western Eurocentric models of funding. They're really for us to understand who we're able to fund. And that's really about us being able to measure the impact of our own capacity and capability building. We have had organisations that aren't Aboriginal health organisations wanting to apply, like land councils, and they are absolutely welcome to apply. The only criteria is that you are an Aboriginal community controlled organisation. And we do ask you how you define your community controlled organisation and a few questions around your organisation within the application form, but it isn't limited to health services. Does the Chief Investigator need to have research qualifications? As I said previously, no. Not that we don't have current funded projects led by researchers with PhDs and formal qualifications and track records. We absolutely do. But we also have CEOs or managers within the community controlled org as being the CIs. So the chief investigator is the person that is primarily responsible for the research. They will make all of the decisions, and they also have all of the accountability to meet the reporting requirements and any of the administrative requirements of the grant. Will extensions be granted? Look, I'm a researcher. I know what it's like for research not to go as planned or to need longer. We have processes built into our research management system so that you can apply for extensions on your grants. Extensions are going to be a lot harder with this current grant round. This current grant round is our last major grant on our current Department of Health header agreement that we have. So we do have our requirements to report back to Department of Health about our research commissioning. So we really welcome applications to consider the time for the research and be very mindful to avoid extensions if you can. And we do have questions within the application that is going to assess the feasibility of the research. So we really want to make sure that it can be conducted as close as possible within those timelines. But we do understand that there is many reasons why Aboriginal communities might need to stop research for periods of time, and we will work with individual communities to support them to make sure that the research that is being done is ethical and appropriate. I do see some questions coming in now, so I'll get Shay will come sit down and Felicity can join us and we'll start to work through some of these. Look, this is heaps cozier when we do this. Look at that. Feels more like home.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Do you want to?
Yeah. So, well, one of the questions that we've had come through, which is, I think, a really important question, because we know in the grants that we currently support that this has come up as well. So one of the questions was, how does it work if an org wants to employ staff to do the research using their research funds, but they don't know who those people are yet, or they haven't brought the team together yet?
I mean, that's common across any grant, isn't it? So in any normal grant that we would apply for, we would have a core research team who we know we would want to work with. And so in the grants that I write, I usually think about the different things that the research will need to do. I'm going to need someone who's going to be really strong in the data collection or the survey development or the analysis. So you will have key people who will be researchers on the project, who can be within universities or in your community controlled organisation or a partner org. And then we would allocate funding for a community research or a research assistant, and that one would be an undefined person as such. So that's totally fine. You can do that. We are going to want to see that person you don't know is going to be able to be supported to do the research that you're outlining in your application by the rest of the research team. So it is still important, similar to any other grant round, that you do form a research team to be able to support the implementation and to be able to articulate to the assessors and to Lowitja that you have all of the key people who know what they're doing to do the research.
Thank you. We've just had another question asking, has anything changed significantly from previous grant rounds that they should be aware of, like in the eligibility criteria, selection criteria?
So there hasn't been massive changes since the 2022, I think we called it. Yeah. So the last major grant round, it's pretty much the same application as the last grant round. If anything, the last grant round was the first time Shay had built the Smarty grant system. And so if anything, you might find the order of questions have changed or the wording has changed slightly, because we always do a bit of a quality assessment process at the end to see if there's ways we can refine things. Every question that we have, and every piece of our major grants has been so carefully constructed so that it is as little a burden on our communities to apply as possible. We want communities to feel like it's achievable, and also so that we can assess it really well and score people appropriately, even though, so it's probably good to just say, like, in terms of eligibility, that's exactly the same. That hasn't changed at all. And we didn't have any issues with that last time. We didn't have anyone apply that wasn't eligible. But the assessment has been tweaked probably slightly, very minor. But it's important to say that we're not just about funding, you know, really large research projects, and we're not just going to score a project that is a national project or has national impact. We also recognise that very localised projects and very localised research impact is impact for our community. So it's really important that organisations acknowledge that 200,000 is even though it's our major grant, it's still a relatively small amount of money when you think of how much it costs to employ someone or how much the actual doing of the research costs. And 2 years is a really short time. So one thing I will encourage people to do is be really realistic with that, and don't sort of oversell yourself, because that will come up in the feasibility. The other thing is you can have joint funding. So if you have received funding elsewhere and you want to apply for a different component or an extension on a project that you have, that you can do that. Well, that's not sort of explicit eligibility. I just think it's probably important that people know those sorts of things. We're not super rigid.
No. And I think it's just really great question and point that you make, Michelle, particularly around, you know, has anything changed in this current round? Because we really carefully consider and curate this for our community controlled orgs, and no one else is doing this. No one else is doing this work. And so we want to make sure that it's as easy as possible for our orgs, but also that it feels easy and accessible at the same time.
Some of those grants are not accessible. They're really challenging and really hard.
Yeah. So can a First Nations business partnering with a university apply for this grant?
We have had that question come up before. That's a really good question. So technically you can be a business, but you still need to be community controlled. And so the community control of that can't just be that it's an Aboriginal owned business, if that makes sense. So you still require having a board and a governance structure to be able to apply. But if your Aboriginal or First Nations business does have that, then you can absolutely partner with a university. We have sort of a balance of applications. Some applications have partnered with universities and some have completely done it on their own. So we do have a real mix of the way in which our communities want to do this. But I think for me, being an Aboriginal woman first and then a researcher second, and then someone who writes a grant program last, I think the best thing about our grant is that if something happens or that relationship no longer serves the Aboriginal community organisation anymore, they are not bound to that work with the university, that they have full control over the ways in which that relationship operates. And we don't see that in other research. We see that communities are being participants in research and they don't have the control or the decision making or the authority. And so while you can work with a university, you aren't particularly scored higher for doing it with a university. But yes, if that serves you and you have really strong relationships, we, encourage you to do that.
And I think speaking back to the careful ways that these grants have been curated for our community orgs is that we've made sure at multiple levels that we're able to ensure communities have the power to lead and direct this research. So we support you through maybe sometimes those challenging questions and conversations that you need to have throughout your grant. We've built in things into the grant agreement to ensure that communities are able to lead and direct this research, and so continue to provide that reassurance that this is really, really thoughtful, carefully considered work that we're doing. We've had one of the questions come in around how many chief investigators should we have. So for example, if somebody or an organisation wanted to have their board be the chief investigators, how would we encourage applicants to manage that?
Calling out that person's name. Hey sis, hey Dawn. It's a little bit different to other grant rounds where we have chief investigators and AI, so academic speak will use CIs and AIs. The Lowitja grants have one CI, which holds the responsibility, and then one project lead, and then a research team. So unlike other grant schemes where we'll have, 10 CIs and 10 AIs, this is largely, we just want to speak to the project team. Because we're funding an organisation, not an individual, the power dynamics is a bit different and the research team structure is a bit different. So I know that you've said that you would want the board to be CIs. The board can all be decision makers of the project, and you can speak to in your application when we ask about how the research team will work together, you can speak to that being a shared CI, but on paper, possibly you are the CI sis, but the board have, shared control and decision making and authority on the application. Hope that answers your question.
Yes, and asking if considering how the elders might be included, which we love to see.
We do. We have funded projects before, might have won and awarded our conference where the elders were all of the chief investigators on that project. In the application form, it's going to look a bit different, but you can speak to it in your proposal and the other sections of your grant to speak to that shared power and shared leadership.
Yeah, wonderful. Just while we're talking about chief investigators, I'll just jump down. We've had a question asking, can the chief investigator be non-First Nations but working for a First Nations organisation?
So we do have this in our current grant round. They cannot be the chief investigator because the chief investigator is the primary decision maker on the project. So the chief investigator must be Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander. The next person down, the project lead, who we speak to as being the person who might do the day-to-day work on the project, they can be non-Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander. And we do have that in some of our applications, not all of them, but we know that our organisations aren't all operated by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and sometimes the best person for the day-to-day operations might be a non-Indigenous person, and that's okay. But as long as the controlling roles, which are the organisation that holds the funding and the chief investigator that holds the ultimate decision making, is Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander.
Wonderful. One of the questions has just asked us, when it comes to partnership applications, how would you prioritise these?
Well, I mean, we wouldn't really prioritise a partner application versus a single application separately. It would be assessed, it would all go through the exact same process. We would acknowledge that a partner application is probably a lot larger. We would also just want to see that the funding that we are giving is not a duplication of funding, that the project that we would potentially be funding is not being currently covered or is a clear extension of other pieces of work. So it wouldn't really change how you were ranked or prioritised at all.
Yeah, wonderful. We love ethics, so we just had an ethics question come through. So if you're having yarning sessions and surveys involved, will ethics approval be required? And is there any specific ethics committees to approach?
For those who don't know, Flick and I are doing a national ethics study with some other people. We do love ethics. So ethics is very different for every community. Ethics is also set up mainly for institutions. We don't have Aboriginal community controlled ethics in every state and territory. So this is a case-by-case basis. If you're doing yarning sessions and surveys, you would be required to do ethics. Unless you can clearly specify, and you would have to justify in your application why you wouldn't deem Aboriginal ethics as not needed. All research conducted by Lowitja Institute requires ethics, but further than that, we also prioritise where possible that it's an Aboriginal community controlled ethics approval that you are getting, because we want to ensure that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander oversight is across all of the research on all of the levels. We have, for our community controlled organisations that have not partnered with a university, we do have a lot that have applied to IATSIS Ethics Committee, and that's been deemed as the most appropriate for them, but that will vary with states and territories. If you are looking to apply, I really encourage you to look at the fees. So IATSIS Ethics has fees associated with their approvals, and just factor them into your grant budget, because we do want to make sure that communities aren't out of pocket by doing a research project, that if anything, having an opportunity like this encourages communities to do even more and more research, not feel like it's too hard.
And I think one of the things that's come up a lot in the last grant round that we had is the ethics can feel really overwhelming for our organisations. And so we did do a webinar in the last grant round to support our awarded organisations. But just to say that we understand it's a really complex field as well, and can feel really daunting. And so we want organisations to, I guess, understand what their rights are within ethics and getting ethics approvals, and making sure that they're not feeling overwhelmed by those processes.
Yeah, we do offer support if, for funded projects too, if they do get stuck with any of that.
Yeah.
I love to do an ethics review and guidance for people.
Yeah. Can a PhD student, could funding support a PhD student?
No, we don't care about PhD students, Flick.
We don't want them.
Yeah, Flick's doing a PhD now. Absolutely, but it's a 2-year project. So in the justification for the PhD student funding, we would just need to have a good context that, a PhD is 4 years essentially, and how that money might be used. As long as you justify, I think that would be wonderful to build capacity and opportunities for more students.
Yeah, and which is something that we have seen as well in the previous grants, that PhD support or part of the project might feed into having a PhD student. So it's definitely doable. There
are considerations with a PhD student, and particularly ICIP, and when things are going into a thesis, as you know, there's complexities to address. So as long as that's really carefully considered and that there remains Aboriginal governance and ownership of the work, I think that's really important, and we would consider that in the assessment process. But it's also a great impact. The other things that can be really useful to consider in applications if it's not a PhD student is opportunities like internships or roles. I'm biased, but in my own research team, I like to give community-based researcher roles, particularly to undergrad students at our university. So thinking broadly about how we might create opportunities for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students in your grants is always good too.
Thank you. Can a research project be a joint application shared between a community controlled org and another org which is not community controlled?
Yes. Well, it wouldn't be a joint application. It would be a partnered project. So in saying that, it means that we would not pay any of the grant money directly to another organisation. We would pay the grant money in its increments to the community controlled organisation, and it would be up to the community controlled organisation to do partnership agreement with the non-Aboriginal community controlled org. So it wouldn't be a joint application where the money could be split, but once you get the money, can split it. And again, that's really up to, that's really about protecting our communities and having them be the decision makers.
Yeah, and I think we've come up with that kind of question before, in between grant funding rounds as well, but I guess posed to Lowitja Institute in the past, because we recognise that there's some really wonderful Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people out there who may be researchers or wanting to be community researchers who are not in our community controlled orgs as well.
Yeah.
So that's also important to consider and think about. And whilst we're not able to fund those particular organisations at the moment, it would be great if there could be that partnership across the sector.
Absolutely. We have one of our current funded projects at RivMed is actually being led by an Aboriginal early career researcher in a university, but she's also a board member of RivMed. So it's wonderful to see the different ways organisations are partnering.
Absolutely. What if I, this might be from the same person actually. So what if I auspice with a First Nations community controlled not-for-profit to engage me to deliver the work in collaboration with a university?
Well, it wouldn't be an auspice arrangement. The community controlled organisation would need to develop and submit the grant application. That we don't do any auspicing or joint arrangements at all. Our agreements and our contracts are directly with Aboriginal community controlled organisations. So the organisation can arrange for, as I said, RivMed are doing that currently with an Aboriginal early career researcher, but that's about the agreement being between the two organisations. We don't have any third party agreements or auspicing arrangements.
Oh, this is a wonderful question, but can you please share some of the research previously funded?
We probably have limited time to go through all of the cool research that we've previously funded, but I do encourage you to go on our website. We do have, I'm sure maybe someone can drop the link in from our comms team for the current funded projects, but we have funded so many different things. We have a beautiful RivMed is a beautiful community-based breastfeeding model. We've funded language programs. We have funded youth research. We have funded, what about you?
Suicide prevention programs. We're currently funding part of the UMI project, the Torres model of care, in our last round. I think just what's really important to me and that resonates for me in that question, and hopefully one of our team has shared the link to our website, but just that these projects are so specific and unique to the needs and the priorities of each community. And so they're all just really wonderful, heartwarming projects to have as well, but there is just such a wide variety.
No two projects are the same.
No.
And some are national projects and some are very localized projects. Impact, we recognise that impact looks different for our mob. The ways in which research is done can be different. This is all about, and I mean, that's why we don't have auspicing arrangements and we don't have joint applications, is because we want to see that the work is driven by the needs of our communities.
Yes, absolutely. Well, just coming up to the last couple of questions, and it's been so wonderful to have such a rich conversation this morning. One of the questions we have is, can the chief investigator, project lead and team all have one person in common for continuity, and then many people from the community controlled org and research team included?
Oh, that's probably maybe a clarity thing. There's only one CI, one team lead, so they've got to be two different people. And then the team absolutely can include as many people as you like from the organisation and research team there really isn't a set number of team members, and we also want people recognised as being research team members as well. So we're inclusive. Put all of the people that would be working on the project in some way, or have been involved in the project in some way in the project team. But we definitely want continuity, but that is kind of a given if it's in one organisation rather than, you know, a multi-institutional piece of work. I hope that answers your question.
In relation to the research agenda themes that are defined in the guidelines, they're also on our website for anyone that does want to pop on there to have a look. But are you able to share briefly from Lowitja's perspective with our research agenda themes? We've got self-determination, sovereignty, cultural determinants, and racism.
Well, you know, in HMRC or MRFF, they'll do a targeted call for research. So they might say, well, our priority is cardiovascular health. And instead of doing a determined or a biomedical call for research, we align with the things that are important to Lowitja. Lowitja want to be thought leaders in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health. And so our research agenda themes are really about, well, what are the priority things that we need to invest in? You know, it can still be self-determination and cardiovascular health, but that's for the community to determine. That's why it's self-determination. But the research themes should be, they've come from community, so they shouldn't be the hard part of doing an application, because Aboriginal communities read those themes and they'll know exactly what they want to align with those themes.
Yeah, absolutely. Where do we seek ethics approval? NHMRC or AH&MRC as examples?
Or when do we seek?
When do we seek? Yeah.
Ethics approval, it's really going to depend on the project. We like to have, at the minimum, it's the second milestone, so it's within the first 6 months. So essentially when you're awarded your grant, for anyone who knows how long it can take to even just carefully develop and appropriately develop an ethics application, I mean, that's not an overnight type job. So we do like organisations to be really ready to be applying. We have, because we keep telling you that we really carefully designed this research project, I painfully did, I really, really did. But essentially the research proposal and the structure that we have for that was designed so that it can ask the key questions that are asked for in an ethics application, so that the organisation will have a good basis for an ethics application process. So we're trying to not have you do whole new work as well. So it is the first thing that we like you to work towards, but it will also depend on what your application is. Some people have, you know, a review or a desktop audit or something like that before they can do an ethics application. So it might differ from application to application.
Yeah, and we know that ethics takes time as well. Even just the committees, we know how overloaded they are at the moment as well, and we can work through all of those issues as we go along. Yes, we've just had a question asked, can we email or call to check eligibility? So this person is saying that they're working under a university because of other research funding, but also have a separate business that's not under the university. It doesn't have a lot of activity though. Would that be an issue?
Yeah, that's probably best to speak to our team. You can email us at research@Lowitja. The team can probably drop that into a link, and we can speak one-on-one with you. We absolutely would not
be
want
one of us.
We absolutely wouldn't want someone to apply if they're not going to be eligible. That was probably one of the most important things to me. So drop us a line and we can organise to have a chat and speak through the nuances of your situation.
Wonderful. And is a study protocol a requirement to have?
Yes, and to help you, we created a template. So in the slides that Shay sort of ran through, we have a range of sort of tips and tricks and guides and things. You don't have to use our research proposal template that we made, but it's really to try and guide you. And almost make it bite-sized,
Yeah.
so that it's not as overwhelming a process. So we ask for you to do up to a 5-page research proposal, which outlines your whole application. And we've tried to give you a bit of a guide for that, but that is a requirement. So I probably should just mention that we showed you the timeline, and it is when Shay Lee's watching Smarty Grants all the time. So as people are trying to working through their applications in Smarty Grants, we can see them listed. If it's getting close to the sort of end date, we would reach out to you and say, hey, we've got an application. If you're having any trouble, let us know. But we also don't have any ability to sort of offer you more time if you don't complete your application. So we do really want you to follow that checklist, which we've created for you to try and help you address all of those areas in your application form. But only complete applications will continue through. And I say that last year, not one person missed something, but yeah, we will try and work with you closely. So if you have any questions, drop us a line in the email and let us know how we can support you to apply.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Michelle and Shaylee, so much for your time this morning sharing. It's always wonderful to share a screen with you, yarning through this stuff that we're all so passionate about. But thank you to everyone who's joined us today and has shown an interest in our major research grant rounds for 2024. And please reach out at any time. We are always here to answer questions. As Michelle said, drop a line to the research@lowitja.org.au email. It will be one of us on the other end that will be able to yarn with you, so that you know there's mob behind the email or the phone calls, and that we truly understand, communities, because we are community. So we just really appreciate your time, and thank you for joining us today.
Thanks. See ya.
Bye.